here in New Acropolis. I live in Brasilia, in Brazil, and I'm a member of New Acropolis in a school that we call South Lake, Lago Sul in Portuguese. And I was invited by Isabella, who you know, to deliver this class to you. And I told her, why not do it in English so that the Brazilians can invite their friends and get to know what we do. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is give you, okay, we have Lais asking you if you want to have the subtitles. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is tell you a little bit about different schools of philosophy throughout history. I want to show you that what we do in New Acropolis is nothing new, but it's actually coming from a long and timeless urge and need that we all have as human beings. It's going to be a 2-hour class, but we might have a break in the middle. And my proposal to you is, as I deliver different parts of my presentation, I'm going to open the floor so that you can actually come in and ask your questions. I heard from Lais that you like to ask a lot of questions, and I think that's really great because it's a chance that I have to get feedback from you so that we can actually have a very good discussion in terms of what I have to tell you this afternoon. So let us start. My first slide is just thinking a little bit about what we're doing here. I was just really glad to hear about Lucia opening this course in the US and all the results we had with YouTube during the pandemic. And what this shows to me is that what we're doing now, which is pretty much to look for answers for our lives, has to do with this timeless quest and a timeless need we all have as human beings. We all want to have answers for the suffering we might be going through. We all want to have answers to why things are happening to us. And we all want to have references and a path so that we can actually go forward. So pretty much what different schools of philosophy have done throughout time is to give different answers, but I would say pretty much along the same lines about the meaning of life. What New Acropolis helps us to do is actually bring that timeless philosophy, that eternal, what we call perennial philosophy, to our world today. Because the quest has always been the same. But what we need to do now is actually to update that quest in a way that's actually adaptable to the problems that we currently face. And I really believe that today we're living a period in history where life is actually quite shallow and quite outward looking. And I see that there is that gap and that void inside the soul of many of us. And that's why I believe the urge of studying philosophy and what we do in New Acropolis is about studying more of that perennial or esoteric philosophy. I think it's really crucial so that we can actually have answers for the great questions that we have in life. So I believe that it's really urgent to be here and to actually look out for those answers, because the whole quest is pretty much to have a life that's meaningful so that we're actually able to live in the present moment. But not only that, we're actually able to find out what our purpose is and serve that purpose. We're all good in terms of looking out for a profession, in terms of looking out for ways of earning our lives, but we're not as good in terms of finding out who we are as human beings and what the purpose of life is. So the whole idea here is to go a little deeper in terms of what the meaning of life is, so that we can actually live with more purpose, with more presence, and better fulfillment of what our soul purpose is. So what we do pretty much, and what different schools of philosophy have done throughout history, is to give those answers. So what I'm going to do is show to you that comparative study. So what is it that Plato said? What is it that Aristotle said? What is it that the Indian schools told us, so that we can actually look at them in a comparative way? And it's good for us to think as well that when we're talking about what those different schools of philosophy have offered, they have not offered only an answer for the mind. Very often, when we think about philosophy, we think about a study that suits the purpose of giving answers to our minds only, but that's not true. When we think about philosophers in the true sense of the word, when you think about Plato, when you think about Pythagoras, they're sages. What means is they're seekers of the way. So it's not only about philosophy for the mind, but it's always philosophy for the heart. It's philosophy for the soul. So when you think about philosophy in the classical tradition, what is it that we're approaching? Is teachings that are to be lived, and not only teachings that are to be thought of, but teachings that are to be giving answers to our hearts and also to our souls. So that's just pretty much an introduction, so that we have a better sense of where we're going towards in our class today. So what we're talking here is pretty much what we call the quest for the ideal. Different schools of philosophy throughout time, they pretty much searched for the underlying causes of life. And I'm going to use a term here. In Portuguese, that's how we call it. I'm going to call it in English, and let's see if it makes sense to you. But we call it philosophy of the causes. But the philosophy that explains the underlying causes of life, the underlying causes of nature, the underlying causes of what happens around us. It's very interesting. But when we think about physics today, it's only about 7%, which is the non-matter that we have. The rest is about black matter and black energy, which means that we pretty much know only a fraction of life. All the rest is still unknown to us, which means that here I am sitting in my office, and this is what you can see from myself, but there are actually a lot of different forces and laws of nature acting upon me that you cannot see. So when you think about philosophy of the causes, we think about the philosophy that looks for what's behind things. What are the underlying causes of life? And I'm going to give you an example here so that you understand where I'm coming from. For example, the third law of Newton, that every action that you have a reaction in return. That's actually the basic law of karma in Hindu philosophy, which is the whole idea that everything you do, you have a reaction that goes with it. And that's quite an interesting law to think about, because all the different schools of philosophy approached the same, which is an author that we study a lot in Acropolis. She used to say, if we understand only the law of karma alone, it helps us explain the whole meaning of life, because we see life as if everything pretty much happened almost at random. But when I think about everything I live, every single thing I live, it comes from that law of action and reaction. It's about us assuming that I'm not born in the family I am out of nothing. The reason why I'm sick, it's not out of nothing. And then you tell me, oh, you're saying that there is actually a purpose behind everything, and that the different schools of philosophy approached that. That's exactly what I'm saying. And then you can ask me, you're telling me that I broke my ankle. And because I broke my ankle, there is a more profound cause behind that. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the reason why I broke my ankle, of course, I might have tipped somewhere, but at the same time, I have a type of thinking that impacts my bone structure, that makes it either stronger or weaker. And that combined with the environment around me makes me more prone to have my ankle broken, which means that it's a very different line of thinking. It means that if I broke my ankle, the type of life I have, everything around me, it happened because a law of cause and effect. And it's very interesting, but because when you look at different religious traditions, they approach the same idea. So let us say, for example, in Christianity, when you look at the Christian tradition, everything you reap, I wouldn't say how to say it exactly in English, but it says something like, whatever you sow, you have to reap. It's actually whatever you put there, you get in return. So that's the same whole idea of karma, which is not only in Hindu philosophy, it's in Christian philosophy. It's also in Greek philosophy. It's actually everywhere in different philosophies. So the reason why I'm bringing this as an example is just to show you is that we actually have the same laws with different names that were approached by different schools. So it's pretty much the same laws of nature, looking at from different perspectives. So it's pretty much looking at philosophy as a way of living, because the more I understand the laws of nature, the better I can get in terms of harmony with the same laws of nature, because it's about making myself responsible for every single thing that happens in my life. I believe I can see very strongly, and that's actually everywhere, that more and more we're developing the type of mentality of being victims of the world around us. And when we look at different schools of philosophy throughout time, what they would put very strongly is that every individual is actually the builder of his or her own life. And the human mind is extremely powerful to change our reality. So what happens pretty much is, even though we might accept that there is a law of action and reaction, many things happen in our lives that we cannot see the clear trait between the action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction that brought me here in the life that I have today. So I've heard a few stories of people who joined New Acropolis, and what they would tell us is, I don't want to know about that, because this is actually bringing too much responsibility on myself, because that means that everything I think, everything I say is going to have a reaction in one way or the other. So, okay, that's pretty much just a panorama, just a scenario, so that you have an idea of what is it, this single law, but it's actually a number of different laws of nature then we study in this different school, so that you just have an idea of how universal they are and how rational they are. And that's the difference between philosophy and religion as well. Because with all due respect, all the different religions and traditions of the world, but as you go deeper in any religion, you are going to find some literature in terms of philosophy, which has to do of going beyond only faith, but actually going in terms of the understanding why that law is stated and how it works. So philosophy has to do with helping us understand the main ideas, the main laws of nature, so that we can actually use that understanding to better live in harmony with the laws around us. Sometimes I like to picture this idea as if we were in the world in a soccer field. And we see the game taking place. You have one player with the ball, taking the ball to the other one and trying to make a goal and etc. But at the same time, imagine that you are there in that soccer field and you don't have any idea of what the rules are. And if you don't know what the rules are, you cannot play right. And what I believe is missing very much in our society today is having a better sense of what are the rules around our lives so that we can actually lead our lives in a way that we can better deal with life, we can better deal with death, we can better deal with aging, we can better deal with the conflicts in our family in a way that we can actually see they're all part of life, they're natural. So we need to learn to deal with them in an intelligent way. So that's just an opening statement so that you have an idea of where I'm coming from. And the other argument I'd like to make before we actually go into the different schools of philosophy is tell you a little bit about the different human needs that we have. Of course, we all love chocolate. We all like to eat well. We all like to travel. We all like to have different types of what we called sensitive pleasures, which has to do with our five senses, and it all gives us joy and pleasure and fulfillment to a certain extent. But at the same time, what brings you here, what brought me here to know Acropolis, is what I call, and that's a very common term that I find very appropriate, is the whole idea of inner urge or inner call. The whole idea of inner urge or inner call is that beyond the call we have of our senses and the pleasure we take in having sweets or traveling, there's a very strong urge in all of us to have more of a soul fulfillment, of being happy, of understanding life, of feeling what we call the pleasures of the soul. And the reason why I put this picture here, that's a very beautiful hallway in a very famous museum, which is called the Hermitage Museum in Russia. And it just depicts very beautiful paintings in the ceiling, very beautiful paintings in the wall. And when we look at this hall, we feel pleasure because there is great pleasure in contemplating beauty. There is great pleasure in just being present. There is great pleasure in being master of ourselves to a certain degree. There is a great pleasure in understanding. There is a great pleasure in being with others. So what philosophy helps us to do, and what different schools of philosophy help us to do, is actually to find a path of leading what we can call a higher type of life. But higher type of life, I'm going to explain what that means. It's not higher in comparison to other people that live lower types of life. That's not what I'm talking about. But higher type of life is in terms of inclining ourselves to higher ideals. Higher ideals means that instead of seeking just the pleasures that we have in our everyday lives that touch upon our senses, is aiming at having higher types of pleasure and higher types of fulfillment. I strongly believe that it is that soul void that many people have that are causing a lot of mental health problems. And that is why there are a lot of people in depression. There are a lot of people with a meaningless life, because it is that void of pleasure and senses that has to do with the soul. And that has to do with beauty. That has to do with justice. That has to do with understanding. That has to do with serving. That has to do with living a fully human life that has different purposes, as opposed to just the fulfillment of our daily pleasures of eating, of doing things that we enjoy. So this is just an image that I find is beautiful. And I think one thing that we learn a lot in philosophy, which I think it's just so great, is to appreciate the power of beauty. Just the power of contemplating what's beautiful in terms of nature, in terms of art, in terms of the world around us. And beauty fulfills our soul in a way that is just very powerful. And you're in a country that appreciates the arts very much. In New York, you have a paradise in terms of galleries and in different places that you can go. And I think that's a privilege to be able to access so much that is just so beautiful and that feels the soul in such a powerful way. So, okay, that's just a quick statement in terms of the power of beauty and the power of the values that move our souls and that makes us feel more fulfilled. So this is just another image, just quick image, so that you can contemplate a little of beauty, so that we can just feel ourselves as well. And I just found these three images that I found were just very, very beautiful. And the image you have on your left is that simple house by a river. There is a woman doing her laundry, and there is a girl, and we just take pleasure and enjoyment in just contemplating. And I think when we look at a picture like that, at a painting like that, we actually are able to have a truly human pleasure. The same applies with the picture in the middle, when you see this lady in this beautiful blue dress, and she's just contemplating. She's just feeling the presence of the very moment where she is. And the third image with that moon in the right, I think it's beautiful as well. And it shows that moon that is just melting. And it was actually created with AI, but it gives us a perspective of beauty as well, which I think it's important for us to contemplate. Okay, so this is just an opening statement. I'm going to get in now into the different schools of philosophy, Pythagoras and Plato, and the chief teachings of them. But before I actually move on, I'd like to open the floor just for a few minutes to hear a little bit about your feedback. Does this make sense to you, to think about the underlying causes of nature? They were actually approached by these different schools by living by higher call in human nature in terms of the call for beauty, of justice, and serving humanity. So does that resonate in you at all? Do you have any comments or anything to say? The law of karma in terms of the world laws in nature before I move on? Any questions? Over to you if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to move on and give you this overview of different schools of philosophy and their teachings and also their masters. Anything from your side at all? Let me see. No?
I don't know, Melissa, but I feel that for me, it's kind of everything is so new. All this knowledge, I had no idea. Sorry, my ignorance, but I had no idea that it existed. It existed. I don't know. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Mahatma, it's just so interesting because it's just so old.
Yeah, I know. So
It's just thousand, a few, not like, several thousand years old. And I think what we're doing now, Mahatma, I really like to think that we're going through a period in world history that we need a renaissance. You know what the Renaissance was?
yeah,
After the Middle Ages? It was this period of bringing back the knowledge that was just forgotten. And I believe that in moments as we're living now, where human soul is just so empty and having this strong call for giving meaning to life again, I think bringing this knowledge back is just urgent, so that we can actually have life back in terms of, going beyond just living outside and living inside. And just to finalize my point, all traditions talked about two different types of life, what we call inner life and what we call outer life. Outer life is pretty much the life linked to our senses. It's the life of what we see, the life of what we hear, the life of what we smell, the life of what we taste, the life of what we touch. It's what different traditions called the sensitive life, the life of the senses that we look up in the world around us. But there is another type of life, what we call the inner life. What is the inner life? It's the life of what's in our thinking, the life of what's in our heart, which brings to us a completely different perspective. So it's not only about us doing things, but it's about us being and experiencing and understanding and being present. And we're overly trained in doing things and being productive and working outside. And the truth is, we're still children in the capacity of looking inside and dealing with ourselves. I teach philosophy here in our local branch in Acropolis in Brasilia, in Lago Sul. And we very often do what we call psychology practices. Perhaps Professor Lucian is doing that with you in classes as well. And the psychology practices that we do pretty much have to do with using our imagination. You know, disconnecting a little bit from the outside, looking inside and imagining ourselves in a whole new world that is inside. And what's the purpose of a practice like this? Because when you imagine, you enter in the world of thinking, and it actually helps you to capture a completely different world, a world that's inside, the world of your heart, the world of your imagination, and see the world from a completely different perspective. And I believe that this whole way of living only on the outside, it is being worn out, if I can say that, in the sense that it's just being it's tiring us. Life is just so meaningless with this type of life that we just work outside, that we have very strong call and need to work inside now. And that's the whole purpose of rescuing this philosophy and bringing it back to our world history so that we can actually live a more meaningful life when we talk in terms of the human soul. So that's pretty much it. Okay, anything else? Any other questions or issue, or should I move on to Pythagoras School now?
Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, and a statement you made a moment ago really resonated with me because I'm an artist who teaches people how to see, and I also run events on getting people to think differently. So I think it's all very much connected. And what I like to say when I'm running these events is I say, you know, if you want to make a difference, you've got to start with yourself and go outward from there. That's really the source of action. So anyway, thank you. It's wonderful to see all these things tied together.
And he's Brax, not Cecilia. I'm Cecilia.
Yeah, that's what I would think. So what's your name again? I'm sorry.
It's Abraxas Hudson.
Abraxas. Okay. Abraxas, like in Greek.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The God of God.
It's a very powerful name for an artist as well. Cecilia.
Thank you.
Just to build on a little bit on what you have referred to, Abraxas and Cecilia. I think we need to help people, give people the ability to imagine again. Because what happens is that the spiritual world has a lot to do with imagination. Mm-hmm. There is a statement made by Blavatsky that she talks exactly about that, how the world of imagination links us to spirituality. So if we're just too focused on the outside, we miss half of the world. Or I would say we miss 70% of the, or we miss 93% of the world. Because what's really concrete and what's matter is a very small fraction of the world. And I strongly believe that, and that's what we're here in Acropolis working for. which is a renewal of the world, a new mentality, a new mankind. And I strongly believe that a new mankind, a new mentality has to come from people being able to connect with what they have inside, in their imagination, in their heart, in their soul. That's the whole source of inspiration. That's the whole source of change. And that's the source of the future that we know to strongly works toward. And just to finalize this comment, and then I'm going to talk about Pythagoras, our national director just this weekend, he talked a little bit about us using the knowledge of philosophy, not only for self-improvement, but for connecting with the ideal of the state. And I'm going to explain this. Not in the state, in the common sense of the world, but in the state as an ideal, in terms of a political ideal, in the sense that it's not only about ourselves, but it's about us and the world, making these ideas work for society. So it's not only about our self-improvement, but it's about us growing enough to be able to better serve and bring a renewal to society as a whole. I'd just like to finalize with that statement, because it's not only about individual purpose, but it's also about collective purpose and collective change. So it's connecting what we have inside with our service to society. And that has to come in the new mentality that we need to build. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of initial comments, in terms of the whole purpose of this ancient schools of philosophy. What I'm going to do now is move on and tell you a little bit about the different schools. Okay, so isn't she going to talk about the different schools? This introduction is just taking so long, but I think it's very important to have this introduction so that we have a broader view of what they talked about and what they worked for. I'm going to start with the School of Pythagoras. What's the School of Pythagoras? The School of Pythagoras was a school that was founded in Crotona, south of Italy. And very often when we think about Pythagoras, we think about the Theorem of Pythagoras, which I'm sure you have learned in school. But we don't very often think about Pythagoras as a sage, as a wise man. It's interesting, just in that anecdote, perhaps you have heard about this. But some say that, Pythagoras was actually born in the island of Samos, which is in the Mediterranean. And then someone called Pythagoras a wise man. He said, you're very wise. You have Sophia. Sophia is actually the quality of someone who's wise and almost perfect. And then some say that it is in this occasion that he would have said, actually, I'm not a wise man. I don't have Sophia, but I love Sophia. That's what makes me a philosopher. Someone, philia, friendship, Sophia, wisdom. I'm actually, he would have said, I'm actually a lover, a friend of Sophia. And I think that's an important statement to make, because in our Acropolis, of course, we're not wise men and women, we're philosophers, which means that we love wisdom. We love wise. And the idea of being a wise man or a wise woman, the idea of evolution. And I think that's an important statement to make. Very often people, they give up their studies on philosophy and self-improvement because they just find it's just too high and it's just too difficult. It's just too much struggle to go after that. And I think we need to bring that very much down to earth to our own lives. And think it's a high ideal, of course it is, but at the same time, we are seekers of the path. I really like the idea of path, being seekers of the way, which means that we're not perfect, very far from it, but we love the high ideals of perfection, of wisdom. And I think that's a lot. There is a very famous sentence from Ralph Waldo Emerson. You might have heard of it. I often quote it in Portuguese, so perhaps I'm not going to say it in the best way in English, but it goes something like, Aim the highest you can. If you miss it, at least you're going to be among the stars. I really like that idea, that aim the highest you can. Aim high, but not aim high in terms of a social position, in terms of how much status you should have, but aim high in terms of the best ideals humanity can have. Look at the best humanity has produced. And when you look at such great ideals, that is going to be closer and closer to your heart because you're going to be around them. There is a very famous quote from Plato, and that's something we often quote in Acropolis, and that is the idea that you become what you often contemplate. If you contemplate only what's ugly, what's declining, what's weird, what's bizarre, you're going to become declining, weird, and bizarre. But if you contemplate, virtue, if you contemplate perfection, if you contemplate the high ideals, you're going to become also closer to them. And I believe in our world today, we're tired of just contemplating what's not going right. There is an institution here in Brasilia. They like to work with producing good news. That's only their work, because the TV and all the media is full of bad news, and they work with good news so that they can actually inspire others. It's just an example of something that has to do with that. And very interesting. The school of Pythagoras, like many other schools of philosophy throughout history, had different levels of acceptance and different levels of classes as you entered the schools. For example, there was an inner group and there is more of an outer core group. And very interesting, when you joined the school of Pythagoras, you actually joined the class that was called the acousmatic class. You know what that means? The acousmatic path, or not the path, acousmatic class, it meant that you're actually in the class. You had classes for 5 years and you're not allowed to say anything. Can you imagine this nowadays? I'm going to tell you why. You would not be allowed to say anything for 5 years. Because the mentality of antiquity, which is very different from ours today, is that you need to listen, you need to observe, you need to integrate, you need to live. Later, you are able to voice things. It's a completely different way of teaching, that of antiquity and that of today. So what the whole idea of the school of Pythagoras, for example, just to give you an idea, was that depending on the profile you had, it was the type of trials you would have. So let us say, this is a very classical example. Let us say you are a person that were very talkative. You talked too much. Pythagoras would ask you, as a way of testing you, not to speak for a month, for example. Or otherwise, if you didn't talk, if you're not used to say anything, if you're just too shy, he would make you talk and give lectures. So it was the way he would teach. And that's just to give an example. And that's something, a little bit of what we do in Acropolis, to be honest. And that's why we're doing this remote class, but we want in the future to be able to open a branch there so that those types of things can be lived in person. Because part of the teaching has to be in our way of being with one another. And what another thing that Pythagoras would do that had to do with those types of trials, so that you can actually resist your temptations and your way of doing things. For example, a famous story is that Pythagoras would set up a beautiful banquet full of sweets, full of different exquisite drinks and beautiful things, and lay the table in a beautiful way, and make all his disciples around the table just be not earning, but with this desire of eating. You know what he would do after that? After everyone was just crazy to eat whatever was on the table, he would just clean the table and leave everyone without eating. Just to give you an example. We don't do that, okay? So that's okay. You can be, that's not one of the things we do, but we do other things to help people learn and grow. But the reason why I'm giving you this example is so that you can see this mentality of practical philosophy. One thing that we do in Acropolis, just to give you an example, if we have a member that tells us, I do not get along with this colleague in my workplace. I don't like him. I don't like her. That person really is difficult for me to deal with. You know what's our advice very often? So your trial is to go there and be able to get along with him. That's your trial. That's your task. That's the accomplishment that you need to have in order to be able to assimilate the concept of unity, for example. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. The other day, we do these practices in our classes everywhere. And one member was telling me that, using this teaching, he told me, I had this difficult relationship with my colleague at work. You know what I did? I closed my eyes and I tried to understand that person more deeply and integrate that person in my heart and understand the motivations behind that person's actions. And that made a whole world of difference. And now I can get along with that person. And I found that was just a beautiful example of one of our members who lived according to this teaching of unity, for example. So it's about that's the type of trials, because what happens is that in a school of philosophy like that, the master or the teacher might be able to give a few trials to his disciples. But when we learn this type of mentality, we learn to see that we have trials that lives brings to us every day, all the time. Do you see the perspective and the mentality? It means that we are under trial all the time. It's seeing life as a great trial that we need to go through in order to purify, in order to grow, and in order to evolve. Okay, so it's just an example of that. So a little bit about Pythagoras, and just to finalize, there is a very interesting book from Brazilian, I don't remember his name, and he did a very interesting research talking about the way of life of the Pythagoreans, the ones that belonged to Pythagoras' school. And he said that they would wake up in the morning, they would do their practices, their morning practices. That's very usual in this type of school. So greeting the sun, being in harmony with nature, opening the day. And that's actually something I highly recommend. And that is to wake up early with that spirit of making that day sacred. And then they would go about their different chores and activities in their lives, working in different streams, in different ways. They would just do their work throughout the day. And at the end of the day, they would dedicate to what Plato would call the divine ocio. I wouldn't, ocio is a Latin word. Which means they would dedicate to philosophy, they would dedicate to arts, they would dedicate to just being among themselves, exercising the capacity of living together. And I really like this image because it's about working outside. It's about making the day sacred. It's about working outside. We all have different things to do in the world around us outside. We have a social duty to fulfill, and that's quite important with our families, in our lives, in terms of the work we provide to society, which is really crucial. But there is that sacred moment again when we go inside and we are able to contemplate, to think, to exercise friendship, and to be in harmony with the, contemplate art and those things that have to do with feeding our soul. And I think that's very crucial. Plato, in his work, he would actually recommend that we need to divide our day in different periods of 6 hours. He would say 6 hours for sleeping, 6 hours for working, 6 hours for doing the practical days of things of life, and 6 hours of dedication to soul things. So I think that's very crucial. Our national director, you might get to know him at some point. He says something that I find very interesting. He says, that sometimes he sees people with so many bad habits in terms of just not cultivating their soul. She's like, why isn't that person saying, she's actually even really good, because with the habits we have, no wonder that people have the mental health issues they have out of the types of life that people lead. So the more we feed our souls, or the more balanced our lives are, the more balanced we're going to be as well. So that's a little bit about the school of Pythagoras. There is another image here that I'm not going to go into now because it's a little complex, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of insights into that. Remember, Pythagoras, mathematician. So, he was into the harmony of nature, the harmony behind numbers, the harmony behind geometry. And he had this image that's called the divine tetractys. And that's the image that he used to explain the universe as it is. That's actually quite deep. I'm going to give you just few insights into that. And what this picture brings to us, it's something that Plotinus, which is another philosophy, also brought to us, and it's a beautiful image. And it's the whole idea that it all starts with one, the principle of unity. The principle of unity, which is the void, the darkness of everything there is there, silent. And from there, light sparks, and one is born. Undifferentiated, all alone, one. But when that one spark comes into life, when light comes, fiat looks, you have the division of the universe in two. And that's when you have the division between spirit and matter, consciousness and matter. And that's why the same old conflict is still within us today. The architecture of life is built on the conflict, on the structure between spirit and matter. This very moment, we have a mind, a consciousness that's trying to be aware and present and understand this life and be connected to this very moment. And we have our body with all its urges and all its needs that's sustaining our consciousness. And that's the old battle that we still fight, and we always will, between matter and spirit. And then you have the three that comes into existence, which is pretty much the cosmic mind that comes into being. I'm not going to get into that. And then you have the four, which is pretty much when the world is built. And just in final words, Pythagoras would argue that it all comes from one. That whole oneness unfolds into matter in different levels, and then it comes back to the mystery of one, which is actually the same idea that is talked about in yoga, for example. What does yoga talk about? It talks about the whole idea that as we come into the world, our consciousness unfolds and it goes outside. The whole purpose of yoga is to help us fold back inside and find our consciousness again inside. And that's why life has this whole movement of going outside and inside. The whole movement of the universe that different scriptures talk about, which is pretty much inhale and exhale, which is coming in and coming out. So that's a little bit about Pythagoras for you. Any questions or anything at this point? This floor is yours. Anything you'd like to mention at this point before we move on to the Academy of Athens? Anything? Let me look at you. There are many with their cameras closed. Anything else, or should I move on and talk about the Academy of Athens? Give you just a couple of seconds. Lise told me that you like to ask questions. I believed her. But if not, it's fine. Okay. So let us move on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Academy of Athens. What was the Academy of Athens? The Academy of Athens, I don't know if you knew that, but it actually lived for pretty much 800 years. So it was a very long education institution in the world, one of the first ones. And of course, the Academy of Athens, it's actually the school of Plato. It's where Plato taught. It's where he worked. It's where he delivered his classes. And it's actually the center of an extraordinary work that is spread throughout the whole world. Okay. So what's behind the Academy of Athens? Pretty much, first of all, I told you that Pythagoras was a sage. Plato, you can tell the same about him. Plato was born from an aristocratic family in Athens in the 4th century before Christ. What was Athens in the 4th century before Christ? It was actually a very busy city, full of ideas, full of philosophers, full of life, full of movement. A lot was taking place. And Plato was actually meant to be a politician, because if you're born from an important family, at that period in history, you're meant to be a politician, because that's what one should do at that point in history if you're born from a noble family. But no, he decided he would do a philosopher. But Plato has something very interesting, because he writes the Republic, which is pretty much a work that talks about an ideal society. And he actually tried to implement an ideal society. So he has very strong views and ideas in terms of politics as well. So he has a very strong characteristic in terms of a political philosopher. One thing that's very interesting, and perhaps you know this, that's actually quite known, and that's very interesting. In terms of Plato and Socrates, Socrates was the master of Plato. And there was a very big argument at that point between Socrates and the Sophists. What is this argument? Let me tell you, the Sophists are actually the parents of our modern lawyers. The Sophists are the type of philosophers that actually helped to build the type of education that we have today. The sophists at the time of Plato and Socrates in Athenian democracy, they helped you convince people to do whatever you found was right, but not necessarily right for everyone. It was only about helping people believe in what you thought was right, but without any commitment to seeing what truth was. The difference between the sophists and Socrates was the only purpose of Socrates was truth. He wanted to spread the idea of beauty, the idea of justice, the idea of perfection. Sophists wanted to earn money. What's very interesting when we look at the work of the Republic is that we realize that we're very much sophists ourselves. The other day I was giving a class and telling people about sophists, how they worked and how they thought. And it was very interesting because as I criticized the sophists a little bit for not being true and just being able to tell people whatever they found was right without being actually right, people felt really bad about that because they felt they were being criticized because we have a sophist mentality ourselves. I don't know if Lucilena has already explained to you Kama Manas. Has she told you about Kama Manas already? Kama Manas is sophism, pretty much. It's us believing in whatever we think is convenient for us. Plato, on the other hand, he helps us think about what's right, not only what's convenient to us. So Socrates and Plato brought the art of dialogue. And what Plato brought, and I'm sure you heard about this with the classes of Lucia and the videos in YouTube and etc., but I think it's really worthwhile reviewing, is the whole theory, I wouldn't say a theory, but the whole concept that Plato had of the world of ideas. Let me tell you one thing. For Plato, pretty much the world we live is Maya. Remember Maya? I don't know if you heard about Maya in terms of Eastern philosophy. But for Plato, this here is an illusion, or this here is not real. And you're going to say, why is this not real? You're touching it. Why is this not real? This is very real. This is true. Why would he say this is not real? Because this is actually something that's temporary. This is actually going to go away. But he said, while this is temporary, this is linked to the senses, there is something behind it that's going to stay. What does that mean? That this is the glass that's going to go away. So this is not real. This is part of the senses. That's what Plato would say. But that's a real world, the mind world. It's where the idea of the glass exists. And you're going to say, no, this is strange. The idea of the glass, what are you talking about? The idea of the glass for Plato means that there is a glass in the concrete world, but there is a glass in the mental world. And why the mental world was superior and more important to Plato than the concrete world? The world, because the world of thinking, the world of mind, it stays. So I've never seen a perfectly just man or woman in my life, but I conceive justice in my mind. If I conceive justice in my mind, that's what Plato would say, it means that it exists. So for Plato, I would say, you know that New Acropolis is a school for idealists. Have you heard that? Probably. The new Acropolis is a school for idealists. What does that mean? An idealist is someone who has never seen a perfectly just man or woman, has never seen the perfect world. But when that person looks at the world with all its injustice, all its ugliness, all its difficulties, he recognizes that there is something wrong. Why do we see the world as it is? And we know there is something wrong. It's because there is something inside of us that tells us what right is. We have an inner sense of good. We have an inner sense of beauty. We have an inner sense of perfection, that it is within us. And that's what Plato would say, that that world exists and we can recognize that world inside of us. That's his argument. So the whole purpose of Plato's education in the Academy of Athens was to help people reach that ideal inside. Because the more convinced is not the right word, but the more we perceive that ideal, that justice, that spirit within us, that ideal within us, the stronger we are in terms of projecting it to the world. So the whole purpose of his education was to have everyone realize and feel and experience that spiritual mental world inside. Just to give you an idea of that, sometimes the more educated we are, the further we are from perceiving that natural sense of beauty and goodness in us, because we get more intellectual. I'm going to give you a little story about that. I remember seeing an article a few years ago that talked about something that happened in the Netherlands. There is an exhibition in a museum in the Netherlands where the name of the exhibition was Access, right? And pretty much the exhibition was modern art, and you have various bottles of champagne in the floor with the name champagne, with the name Access. The following day, after the vernissage, the opening of the exhibition, the cleaning team cleaned up all the bottles that were in the floor of the exhibition. Because the cleaning team, the cleaning ladies, the cleaning men, when they saw all the champagne bottles, they thought it is just all messy here. There was a party yesterday, so we need to clean up all this mess. So what happened was that they cleaned up all this mess. I'm going to give you the floor in a little bit, Manda. And the reason why I'm bringing this up was because the cleaning ladies, in a very natural way, when they saw all that mess, what they did, they cleaned up. They were not informed, they were not instructed in a certain canon of art, of modern art, where they would think, oh no, it's conceptual art. No, it's actually, there is a purpose. So it's actually something I have to understand, so that they cleaned it up. If they had seen something just beautiful, they just faced something just beautiful that touched their hearts, I'm sure they would not clean it up. They would leave it as it was. The reason why I'm arguing this is just to tell you that we have a very natural and inner sense of beauty, a very natural and inner sense of good, a very natural and inner sense of justice. And what Plato said was that, clean up, try to help people see themselves inside, so they can actually have a better way of thinking, a better way of expressing, and a better way of just being themselves. They can be more true to themselves. Okay? So that's just an example to illustrate that all of that truth, according to Plato, is inside us. So the whole idea is not to put in more knowledge or things, but to help clean up, to help people bring from within what it is they already have through the dialogue, so people can think through about the main ideas in life. All right, so Amanda, you have a question there. I was actually going to give the floor now to you, so that you can actually ask questions after the Academy of Athens. Amanda, over to you. You have raised your hand? Or not? Amanda, you want to ask a question? Not?
No, so sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Out of mistake. Okay. I think when you close your camera, you raise your hand. No problem. All right. So, well, anyhow, okay, it's enough. Yeah? Okay, you're muted, Amanda.
I'm at salon. Sorry.
It's okay, no problem.
All right.
That's okay. Okay. Okay, so any questions? Well, anyhow, any questions now from Amanda or anyone else? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the Lyceum of Aristotle, or we can actually have a few minutes break also. Lais told me that it is not usual to have a few minutes break between these classes that you have in between the regular course, but you can think through as well. Any questions in terms of the schools so far? Academy of Athens, the School of Pythagoras, or not really? Does that make sense to you? And just a final word in terms of the Academy of Athens. It is very often that we think of, okay, so philosophy came from Greece. This is not true. Actually, Plato, he went to Egypt. He was actually initiated in the mysteries of Egypt. And Egypt was actually a culture full of knowledge, full of philosophy, full of mysteries. And Plato went to Egypt in order to have his instruction. So there are other cultures far beyond Greece that have their systems of knowledge and philosophy. In Egypt is actually a highlight in that in this human history. So it's important to acknowledge that as well, that Plato was deeply connected to the mysteries of ancient Egypt. All right. So no questions so far? Shall we make a break or shall we move on? Go ahead.
I do have one question. In terms of like timeline, Pythagoras came first than the school of Athens, or they coexisted?
No. The school of Pythagoras was far before, so it's about 700 BC, and then you have the school of Athens was about 400 BC. So it was actually before it was Pythagoras, okay, and then it came the school of Athens. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Lyceum of Aristotle, okay? Just out of curiosity, I'm sure you might, I don't know, some of you might have gone to Greece already. Just, a few years back, I went to Greece. It was very, very interesting. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I want to tell you something that I noticed when I went to Athens that I think it's really worth saying. The school of, because I think it's very symbolic. The Academy of Plato, it's far from downtown Athens. And the Lyceum of Aristotle is right downtown Athens, very close to the market, the famous market, Agora, and where the public space was, and for me that's very symbolic. The reason being, because when I think interesting, Plato was actually very influential in terms of developing not only Plato, but Aristotle. They're both very influential in terms of developing Christian theology, actually. And you know what happened during the Middle Ages? Plato was considered to be very difficult. So what the scholars would do, they would study Aristotle first, and then they would move on to Plato. And there is a very important distinction here between Aristotle and Plato, because Plato has to do with high ideals, looking at what's really high in nature. And Aristotle is more devoted to thinking through about nature and our material world in terms of logic as well. So these are different concepts, different mentalities, different ways of looking at life, which are complementary in a lot of ways. But the reason why I said the academy was distant from downtown Athens and Lyceum of Aristotle was right in the heart of the city, because I think Aristotle reflects our culture much better as opposed to Plato. Plato it's very high, it's very metaphysical, which is very far from our culture. It's very important for us to keep in mind that our culture is very practical. It's very down to earth. It's very pragmatic. Very different from, let us say, ancient Indian, which is very much metaphysical, very much more spiritual. Our culture is very much Aristotelic, if you want to call it this way. Okay, so Lyceum of Aristotle, it was actually a disciple of Plato, but then he broke up in a certain way with Plato. He went to a different path. But what I want to tell you in terms of the school of Aristotle, which is very interesting to learn, is that Aristotle teaches us how to be a happy person. Do you want to know how to be a happy person? Aristotle tells us how to be a happy person. There is this book called The Ethics. I know it in Portuguese. I cannot recall it in English. But there is this book that was written to Nicodemus, which was the son of Aristotle, where he teaches how to be happy. And I'm going to tell you what he tells us about this. Aristotle argues in the following way. He says, everything in nature has a purpose. Everything in nature has a different way of being. So let us say, I can think of the stones, the minerals, they might have their own way of being happy. I would say that the plants, they have their own way of being happy. Let us say, if I have plants at home, I know if my plants, they're happy or not. If they're happy, they're flourishing. If they're not happy, they're dry, they die. I know if an animal is happy. The animal is happy, you give them care, you give them, company, you give them food. You can see if the animals are happy, and you can also see if the animals are not happy. And then he asks us, what about human beings? What makes human beings happy? In order to know what makes human beings happy, I need to understand what is human nature. And if I ask what human nature is, what is private about us? What is it that we have that no other being in nature has? And that is what he says, and everyone says, which is part of our nature, and that is reason. So what Aristotle would say is that if a human being, and that's very simple, philosophy sometimes seems so obvious and simple, and at the same time so logical, because see what he argues. He says the following: if human beings exercise their nature and they're just themselves acting according to their own nature, they're going to be happy. Because if the minerals act according to their own nature, they're happy. If animals act according to their own nature, they're going to be happy. If human beings act according to their own nature, they're going to be happy. And then he says, what is human nature? Human nature is about exercising reason. And then he says, what is reason? And we're like, okay, fine, exercising reason. I think a lot and I'm not happy. What is the exercise of reason? And then he says, the exercise of reason means being able to practice a virtuous life. Being able to have a virtuous type of living, of being a virtuous person, practicing the virtues. And then you think, what is it to practice virtues? And then he says, a virtue is the right point, the balance between an excess and the absence. I'm going to explain it to you. Okay. For example, let us think about the virtue of generosity. A person who is generous. That's the right measure of being able to give. If someone gives too much, that person is giving too much to her son, to his son, and is going to teach the wrong lesson because he needs to have the right measure of things so that he can actually goes after things and earn the capacity of doing things. If you give too much, sometimes you spoil someone. So he says, it's not only about giving too much, you have to give in the right way. And if you don't give anything, you're actually someone who holds everything to you. That's actually a vice. So he says, when I use my reason to exercise the right measure of giving, not giving in excess, not giving too less, too little, I'm practicing the ability of being generous. Do you understand that? That's generosity. I'm going to give you an example. Those are examples Aristotle gives. The other example is the example of being, for example, brave, courageous. He says, there is a problem if I don't fear anything. Because if I'm here, I don't fear anything. I have an access. I don't fear anything. I'm right close to falling from a bridge, and I don't feel any fear. That's a problem. That's wrong. Have some level of fear is needed. At the same time, if I'm here and if I fear everything, I don't move anything forward. So he says, what is being courageous? What is being brave is having the right measure of doing the right thing, having the right measure of fear, which means exercising my reason to be in the middle ground between not having any fear and then having fear of everything. And that's the exercise of reason. So for him, there is a right measure of being happy. What is being happy? Being happy is exercising reason, because someone who exercises reason is a free person. What means to be a free person? It's an idea of what the Greek culture would call ataraxia. Ataraxia is a different word to express the ability of being free, independent from circumstances, which is pretty much everything that happens. I'm able to find a point in myself of center of virtue and not being moved by the circumstances. So happiness is about evolvement of our consciousness as human beings. So the more virtuous we are, the happier we are. The more disciplined we are, the more courageous we are, the more loving we are, the more compassionate we are, the more just we are, the happier we are. That's why being happy is not only about being joyful. It's different to be joyful and to be happy. To be happy has to do with an everyday accomplishment, because I choose to be happy through the way I live my life. And being happy is costly. It's not always something that comes out of nothing. I actually need to have merit to be happy. That's the whole mentality of Aristotle. So that's a little bit about Aristotle, so that you have an idea of what he told us. And it is very interesting that the way that Aristotle taught was they would actually walk around the gardens of his Lyceum, and he would actually do philosophy, walking with his disciples. And that was quite an important school in his time. So that's a little bit about Aristotle. Any questions now in terms of Aristotle's school before we start and go to Platonic School of Florence? No. No? You know everything about Aristotle? Have you had this class already with Professor Lucia of Aristotle, or not yet? If not, you're going to have it at some point. Okay, so let us move on now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Platonic School of Florence. What was the Platonic School of Florence? The Platonic School of Florence was a movement that was actually born in Florence, of course, during the Renaissance, the 1400. Mahatma, you want to say anything? You want to ask a question?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Can you give us a timeline of all these schools after you explain all of them?
Yes, of course. The school of Pythagoras was pretty much 700 before Christ. The school of Plato was 400 before Christ. Aristotle as well was right after the school of Academy of Athens. The school of Aristotle was pretty much around the same time, 400 before Christ. And the Platonic School of Florence was in the 1400s in Florence, in Italy. So it was, was much closer to us. Okay, but I'm going to tell you as we move on. So the Platonic School of Florence was developed during the Renaissance. And that's actually quite interesting, because what happened was the whole knowledge, Plato, how Plato was called? He was called the divine Plato, because Plato, it's interesting, but there is philosophy before Plato, there is philosophy after Plato. So important that he was. And what happened was that during the Middle Ages, we forgot, Mahatma was telling me, I didn't even know about that. Where is that knowledge coming from? And we're arguing that it is very old knowledge. The thing is, it's outdated knowledge in the sense that it's a little forgotten in our history, because this happens sometimes. This more inner knowledge gets forgotten through times in history. And what happened was that in the Middle Ages, this whole knowledge of esotericism, Hermetism, Greek philosophy, it was in a certain way hidden. Not hidden is the word, but it was cultivated in the East. It was actually cultivated in the Byzantine Empire. It was actually cultivated in Persia. It was cultivated by the Arabs. So what happened was that during the Renaissance, a lot of the knowledge with the fall of the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, what happened was that knowledge migrated from the East to the West. And the great period and moment where it happened was in the city of Florence in the 1400s, which is called, the great century where philosophy flourished, thanks to the Medici family. So what happened was that during that time, there's also a great dialogue between the Eastern and Western church, the Byzantine Empire, the Orthodox Church, and also the Roman Catholic Church. They had their dialogue. And what happened was that knowledge of Plato was cultivated in the East. Then it came to Florence, and one of the Ficino was very impressed by one Byzantine leader and religious leader that had very much knowledge, a lot of knowledge on Plato, and that was he's called Themistocle. And what happened was that he commissioned a priest, philosopher, a doctor called Marsilio Ficino to open a school of philosophy in Florence after the teachings of Plato. So what happened was he gave them manuscripts of Plato's work in Greek and asked Marsilio Ficino to translate it into Latin so that everyone could read at the time, in Italian as well. So what happened was that with that translation, they opened a school of philosophy, and this school of philosophy was very influential at the time, and it helped to promote the Renaissance. And that's so interesting because Marsilio Ficino, I told you, he was a priest. He liked alchemy. He liked all Eastern philosophy. So he made a mix of different types of philosophy and spread through his time. And I think that's a very interesting spirit to have, which is a very eclectic spirit that he brought into the Renaissance. And there is something beautiful that he brings from Hermetism. There is that very famous book, Professor Lucia has a reading of that in Acropolis play, which is a channel that we have. It's actually going to be translated into English soon. And Corpus Hermeticum is this classical book. And he says something very interesting. He says, human beings are meant to be a bridge between the spiritual and the concrete world. I'm going to explain this a little more. Human beings, we have two abilities or two powers that neither gods or animals have. That what another philosopher, Pico della Mirandola, would say, which is we can think. Our mind go to the depths of the universe, thinking about expansion, about the infinite world, and our mind goes further and further and further. And at the same time, we have our grounds, we have our body on the floor. What does that mean? That we have that ability of connecting heaven and earth. So we can actually bring those ideals and reflect upon these ideals, understand those ideals, and bring the ideals to our concrete life. And that was what Marsilio Ficino proposed to rescue that type of philosophy. He also said that love was the music that prepares man to receive the divine. That love opened the doors to the entire world. What does that mean? With our minds, we understand, we separate, we classify. Love enables us to connect with the world through our hearts. And that's much more powerful in the sense that when I look at you, I look at your faces, I hear your words. It's about, I am here, you are there, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking about you. But it's, I am one thing, you're another thing, and I'm thinking about you. That's what mind does. It separates things. And that's very necessary. The other thing is, if I develop towards you empathy, if I develop towards you love, if I develop towards you that feeling, that makes a connection between us. And then I don't look at you with my mind, but I feel you. If I feel you and I connect with you, it's like as if I am you to a certain extent. Do you see the difference? It's about putting our hearts connecting to the world and the world being connected to us. And that's why different traditions always talked about wisdom not related to the mind, but wisdom related to the heart. Because when I love something, I connect with what I love. I care for what I love. I feel what I love. And I care and I'm there. It's not only about I, my mind, and the other. And that's why devotion, compassion, and empathy were always crucial pillars of the path. And that's why one can read every book in the world and not be able to understand the laws of nature. Because the laws of nature are not understood by simply reading the books about them, but the laws of nature are understood by us being the laws of nature, serving nature, loving nature, opening our soul to nature. Nature being not trees and rivers, nature being life and everything that's around us. That's why the wise man is usually the one that's described as the one that is just so connected with the world. He's in the heart of the world. So he is the world. He feels the world. He's part of the tree and he feels the pain of the tree. And that's not about something of knowledge outside, but it's about an experience. And that's not something that one can transfer to another. It's something that each one of us have to live on our own. We can share our experience, we can talk about it, but it's not an experience that one gives to the other. It's just something that we have to develop ourselves. There is a very beautiful poem by a Brazilian author that I can't remember the name, but it talks about something like, if there is a void in your life, if there is a gap in your life, if there is something missing in your life, put love inside. Fill with love. Generate love. And what we learn very strongly in Acropolis, that love, it's not something that we feel out of an emotion or an attraction by something or somebody, but it has to do with a choice we make of love, which is very different. So it's not something spontaneous, it's a choice. Because as human beings, with the power of being aware, with the power of reason, we choose what we feel, we choose what we project, we choose what we are. And we also have the power of our will to choose to love. And that is very powerful. It's a state of consciousness that we need to create. And that's the type of thinking that Marcílio Ficino taught. And just to finalize this topic, Marcílio Ficino was very much inspired by the work of, or the myth of Orpheus, which is the Greek god of the underworld. And in Greek culture, there were the Orphic mysteries. And in the Greek tradition, the Orphic mysteries, when they talked about love and they talked about art, they talked about the capacity of Orpheus in ancient times to play his lyre of 7 chords. And they would say that whenever Orpheus played his lyre of 7 chords, men and women felt beauty so strongly in their hearts that they felt connected with everything. And that's the type of experience they had in those ancient schools that Marsilio Ficino was inspired by, that brought to the Renaissance, that changed the world at the time. The reason why we seek fulfillment in things that are just so sterile, of doing things outside, it's because we don't have enough experience of the soul. Because if we did, we would find all the other experiences just so shallow and just so meaningless that would devote much more time to those more profound soul experiences. I finalize here the Platonic School of Florence and give the floor to Roberta so that she can comment on.
Oh, thank you. So you said a sentence that I like it. You said, if there is something missing in our life, we have to fill it with love, right? That's what the sentence you said, right? So I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to make it more practical, and I'm thinking if you can give an example. I was thinking, for example, if I'm missing patience in my life, how can I fill it with love? So I'm trying to to think about it. I'm not sure if you have an example, but how can we turn it into love?
Yeah. First of all, the poem talks about when you have a void, when you feel that void of an empty soul, you fill it with love. But I'm going to relate to your question in the following sentence, Roberta. Imagine that you're in your house, right? And you're cooking for yourself, or you're just tidying the kitchen because you have to tidy it up. And then you're just doing it because you're in a hurry, because there is just so much to do. And you're doing it out of this duty that you have, but you don't want to do it. And then you're just trying to do it the fast you can so that you can just get rid of that daily chore that you have to work on so that you can just move on to something more important to do. Imagine now that you enter your kitchen without being in a hurry, and you make a commitment to yourself, and then you say to yourself internally, no one needs to know that, I'm going to tidy up this kitchen with my heart and with love. Without being in a hurry, you tied up the kitchen with care, with presence, with love, doing things as if you're carrying something very precious, and feeling your heart and feeling your presence. If you learn how to do it in your own kitchen daily, and it's something that you have to do every day, you are going to learn the capacity of being more patient in other circumstances when life requires of you, because you would have practiced enough. Let us think that you have to go to work and you are driving and you are in a hurry because you don't want to be late. And then there are so many cars, and then there is someone calling you, and then there is your husband in the car or your kid in the car, and there is all that confusion around you that makes you impatient. Think that, project that scene if you leave your house a little before work and you put yourself in a mood that no matter what happens, I'm going to hold that feeling of love and care and make that commitment with yourself. Let me tell you one thing. We have a lot of external targets of how much we should earn, the house we want to purchase, the trip we want to make, but we have very few inner targets. Perhaps a good target for you this year still and next year, because it's a work that takes time, is to develop patience and use your imagination. The imagination is very powerful. You can wake up in the morning, as the Pythagoreans would do, and you can reflect upon patience, and you can feel patience and love and project that in your mind so that you can live it throughout your day. A very, very powerful practice is for you to imagine your day before you live it, so that your mind goes before you and see the scene before you. The more details you project, the better it is going to be in real life. So try to do that and see what happens. I would say it's, has the possibility of giving good results. Try it.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions? Should we move on? Okay. So we have now the Eclectic School of Alexandria. Eclectic School of Alexandria, very powerful. It was actually about 300, 400 after Christ. That's a bit later. And that's very interesting. The Eclectic School of Alexandria was in Alexandria, in Egypt. And it is also called the School of Philaletheus, which is pretty much the lovers of wisdom. And a very interesting figure of that school was Hypatia of Alexandria, which was a brilliant mathematician that led the school, and a daughter of Theon, who was also a mathematician. And what's beautiful about that school is the capacity they had of developing an eclectic approach to philosophy. They had Jews, they had Christianity was, just starting at the time, but they had the old Greek religion. And what they did pretty much was to help create the basis of the great religions and do comparative studies. And one word here that I think it's relevant is the whole idea of eclecticism. Eclecticism is not about anything goes, and it's about anything is allowed, but it's about being able to see the truth behind every tradition. What we do in Acropolis is look at the great ideals of life and try to see it in different traditions and religions. And that's very good because it gives you an ability to be understanding towards different religions and different traditions, because there is not one single religion that holds all answers, but they all have grains of truth, and they have different perspectives that helps us see the world in a more holy and complete way. Well, and just a few, I'm going to go a little quicker now. We don't have much time left. A little bit about Indian schools, just some quick words. The Indian schools, called the darsanas, and developed in different times in history because they're alive. India is a great culture in terms of philosophy and schools of philosophy. And there are what are called the 6 schools of philosophies, which are the darsanas, which their key objective is pretty much the liberation of the soul. What is the liberation of the soul? The liberation of the soul means beyond the incarnations, beyond the body, beyond the personality. It's pretty much about the liberation of the soul. And there are different approaches for that type of liberation. You can be liberated via logic, pretty much, different approaches in terms of understanding and mastering the mysteries of the mind. It's not that all these ways are exclusive, but they're complementary. There are different approaches for the way. You can do it by developing a deep understanding of the matter, which is atomism. You can do it by karma mimamsa, which is pretty much a sense of duty, doing what needs to be done. You can also better understand life through the relationship between matter and consciousness. It can be through yoga, which is pretty much the mystical union of the soul with the universe, and the Vedanta, which is pretty much study and deepening yourself in terms of the last objective of the Vedas, which is the liberation of the soul. But it's a more philosophical type of school. And there are different approaches for the Vedanta, which I'm not going to get into. It's just so that you have an idea. Sometimes we think about Indian philosophy and we think about it being only mysticism, but there is a lot of rationality, there is a lot of logic, and there is a lot of science as well. Actually, ancient India was the house of great astronomy, great mathematics, and great knowledge. India might actually be a civilization older than we know about. And that's something we study more in the course of our philosophy course. Just, going towards the end in terms of School of Mysteries, just very quick. That's just an addendum. The schools of mysteries were pretty much schools present in all ancient traditions, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Babylon, which is pretty much about giving a different perspective of reality. Example, in Acropolis, we talk about the high mind, right? Manas, you might have heard about that. In a school of mystery, they did not talk about it. They showed it, which is different. Here it is, Manas. Here it is, Bodhi. Here it is, the inner side of life. They showed it. Remember when I talked about Orpheus? He would play his lyre and everyone would be moved by beauty and feel the presence of the universe by listening to his music. That's what the schools of mysteries did. They led disciples' experience directly. It was very difficult to get in. One had to earn the privilege of entering the schools. It was very difficult. And there were stories of leaders who were actually denied their presence in the school. And he also performed scenes recreating myths, which reflected inner experiences. Theater, which was pretty much used during their ceremonies, just to give you a quick example. Well, as a synthesis of the different schools of philosophy, they talk about a path of evolution as a way of living and being happier every day. It's not something of the mind. It's not something distant. It's something to be lived all the time. It's about finding meaning in every experience. There is nothing that happens out of random. There is a purpose. There is a meaning behind absolutely everything. Everything. And that's what they talk about. The ability of men and women to connecting to every moment and giving meaning to every moment. There is not one situation that's, oh, this was not part of the plan. I don't deserve this. This should not be happening. This does not exist. We say this out of our own ignorance. Because if we understand life, we see that there is a law of cause and effect behind everything. There is an explanation and a reason for everything. The problem is my own ignorance of not being able to absorb what life is giving to me. but I need to find meaning behind everything. And that's about being wiser. It's about understanding oneself and others and the world around us. And ancient schools had their own practices and celebrated fraternity. It's not only about an individual path, but it's about serving others. All the schools had a very crucial role in terms of helping people to mature, evolve, and give references for practices, for laws, for ways of conducting society. And that's not out of purpose that leaders of all times were able to join this goal so that they could have insight and knowledge and structure to help lead others and develop humanity. Well, that's pretty much what I had for you. We still have 4 minutes left. I'm going to open the floor now if you want to make any comments, ask any questions before we finalize. Anything?
I do have one question. For this last one, you said that you needed to be invited. What about the other ones, the Platonic, the
That's a good
Academy of-
question. No, in general, we had to be invited. The thing
Okay.
is that the schools of mysteries, they were even harder to get in. That was my point.
Okay.
Because they're very difficult. They're very much high level. So usually knowledge today is much more open than it was before. And what we teach here in Acropolis is just like the tip of the iceberg. It's just a little bit, because what these schools taught was higher and bigger, and it was difficult, and it was very restricted. Knowledge is being increasingly open for a need of humanity. But there's still some knowledge that's still closed in some schools that we might not have access to, but usually that knowledge was through invitation, because in schools of mysteries, you had to make a vow of not saying anything of whatever you learned. Mystery means to be silent, not to tell whatever you learned. So you would have this vow of not saying anything, because that's how it worked in the past.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Any final question? No?
Sure.
Abraxas?
Hi, yeah, I would just like to say, as a contrast to the School of Mysteries not sharing knowledge, I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And I wanted to ask you if there will be follow-up presentations.
Abraxas, not at the moment, it's not planned. But all this knowledge in terms of School of Philosophy, it's all embodied in our course. So it's all there. And we also have Acropolis Play, which has additional knowledge on those schools. That's there as well. And the whole purpose of New Acropolis is to help that knowledge be shared in a way that's accessible to us in our present day. Because before, that knowledge was not easily shared, and because, it is difficult knowledge. If you go to the Vedas, it's difficult to read. If you go to those ancient texts, they're difficult. So the whole purpose of New Acropolis is to help that literature, that knowledge, be present in our modern day, because there is this great urge and need, as I have described before. So, we are happy that you're all here, following New Acropolis course. And it is our hope that you can also share this knowledge in the future, you here, there in the US, so you can pass it on. That's actually our hope for you, for this class, for those who are here with us this afternoon and throughout the course. We want this to be as shared and as spread as much as possible. And the more people we have that are touched by those higher ideals, the better it is for you as individuals, and the better it is for humanity. Because it is time for this knowledge to be more open and to be more shared, and to better enlighten us as human beings and as humanity more collectively. There is an urge. So we definitely need to do it more. And we're counting on you as well in the future to help us do that as well.
Yes, I would love to. America needs your messages and your wisdom. So thank you so much. Love it. And to that point, I wanted to ask you, will there be more English language content?
Abraxas, do you speak Portuguese at all?
I do not, and none of my friends do, except for Cecilia.
Abraxas, so we might. If you bring your friends, so we might.
Yeah, exactly. I had a few friends on the call today, so we're doing our best to spread the message. I sent it out
Thank
far.
you so much.
Yeah, I shared far and wide, but not until today. So late notice, and I think a lot of my friends were busy on the Saturday. But yeah, I'd love to do my part to help share.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear. My afternoon was worthwhile.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Obrigada aos brasileiros que vieram. Thank you for the English speakers who came, and it's been a pleasure. All the best for you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Melissa. Thank you so much.
Obrigada.
Thank you, Melissa.
Obrigada.
Bye.
Bye.